Hello, welcome to the Run Testers and our third video in partnership with Precision Hydration. We're here with Andy again. In the first two videos on fueling and hydration, do go and check them out. We put out the call for questions that people might have about kind of those two things and common problems that arise with fueling and hydration on the run. We've got Andy back in now to answer those so we can really give you some specific advice relating to those issues that crop up with a lot of runners. All right, if you're ready, Andy, we're going to dive straight in and get on with some of these questions.
For sure.
Right, we're going to start with some questions about hydration, and the first one is from Tom Clowes. What does salt actually do? Carb I get, it gives you energy, but salt, apart from making chips taste even nicer, I don't really know.
Yeah, that is a good question. That's one that we get asked quite a lot, because obviously what we started out doing was advising athletes on how much sodium to take.
Yeah.
I think the best way to start tackling that question is probably by saying, well, okay, what sort of symptoms and signs do we see in the absence of it? So when you don't take on salt, what can happen? And the weird thing is that in some people, in some circumstances, certainly when the weather's cooler, when you're not sweating as much, the honest answer is you won't see a lot of difference, because you do have reserves of salt and sodium in the body that you don't deplete fast enough or to enough of an extent to see a difference. Having said that, when you are sweating quite a lot, when you start to lose a lot of fluid, you lose salt in that, and that's when we can start to see signs and symptoms that you might be depleting. A big one of those that doesn't happen to everyone, and it's a controversial one, can be cramps. Okay. So sometimes salt can help, or sodium can help to prevent or mitigate cramps, because sodium is the most predominant electrolyte in your extracellular fluid. And when you've not got enough of it, it causes fluid shift from the intracellular and extracellular compartments between the two, which can change pressure around nerve endings, and that's one of the theories around why it might precipitate cramping. Okay. Which kind of underlies the main fact of what does salt do, or sodium do in the body? Well, it regulates fluid balance. Right. So what it tends to be is if you become sodium depleted, you get problems associated with fluid balance. Right. So by putting more salt or sodium in, we maintain better fluid balance in the face of losses and end up with better homeostasis. Okay. So you feel better. You can also, with a lack of salt or sodium, you can get problems to do with digestion and absorption of foods and drinks that you're taking in. Right. Because if your homeostasis is out of whack, if you're losing a lot of salt and not replacing it, that's when people get sometimes bloating and a sloshy stomach and things building up in there. Sodium in the body is also involved in nerve transmission, cellular communication, that sort of thing. So it can create loads and loads of little problems when you start to become depleted or get an imbalance. But I would say they happen potentially later than problems associated with the carbohydrate, and are a little bit harder to pin down in terms of specificity. Okay. Relating to my own experience, I can say for sure that when I've been in races where I've become depleted of salt or sodium, I feel like a horrible sense of just general fatigue and lethargy. For me, it was muscle cramps as well, and all stuff which is then corrected very quickly if you take enough salt in. So that's I know that's not a really easy specific answer, but the symptoms of sodium depletion are not easy and specific to pin down. Right. But you kind of know when it happens. Does that make sense?
It's important, definitely. Yeah.
But I would say if there's a number one takeaway from that, it's like sodium is intrinsically involved in fluid balance, and obviously maintaining blood volume, that's a key component to endurance performance. So without it, we're on the back foot when it comes to maintaining blood volume and that during exercise.
Brilliant, fantastic. Then we actually had a couple of questions, and these are from Hazim Mohammed and just GT, and basically it's, can you have too much sodium on the run? Can you have,
like anything, you can definitely have too much. If you're just popping salt pills indiscriminately or drinking drinks that are way too strong, you can definitely take in too much sodium. I would say one of the signs that that's happening is you might get a very dry mouth. Because salt and sodium stimulates thirst. Okay. That sort of feeling when you've eaten too many crisps or salted peanuts or something, you get that really dry, thirsty mouth. That can be a sign that you're taking on too much salt or sodium. I would say you've got to work relatively hard to do so, although we do occasionally hear stories of people doing it. If you're taking sodium on in sports drinks, it's actually relatively hard to overdo it because relative to the drinks, the level of sodium is quite dilute. Even in a strong sports drink, it's pretty dilute.
Okay.
Sort of in relation to what's in the level of salt in your body. So it's difficult to overdo it. But I would say thirst and a dry mouth, even if you're drinking a lot, is a sign that you're taking too much in.
Brilliant. Another question we've got, really interesting this, is talking about potential negative kind of results of not getting hydration right. This is from Snooker Loopy 1971. My wife really suffers from bad migraines after runs. So do you know what's happening here and maybe how it can be rectified?
I mean, migraines is a big topic, and I'm not going to pretend to be a doctor or an expert at all. But based on experience of talking to people about this, a really common feedback that we get from people who've used precision hydration products during running sessions is that if they suffer with headaches or migraines afterwards, this can make them better or go away. Not in all cases, but in quite a lot of cases. And I did some reading on this on the web, and looking at, I think, according to the American Migraine Association, they say that sort of as many as 1 in 3 people cite dehydration or electrolyte imbalance as a trigger for migraines, which kind of makes sense because lots of dehydration, electrolyte imbalance, fluid imbalance, all of those things affect blood pressure, which can affect, vascular pressure can affect the pressure in your head, how you feel. I don't know what the underlying mechanism with it is, but it seems like little things which push your body out of whack, out of homeostasis, like going for an hour's run and not drinking anything. If you're someone who suffers from headaches and migraines, that can make it worse, and by hydrating adequately, it can make it better. And we generally find that an electrolyte drink seems to be superior for doing that than just drinking water.
Brilliant.
But,
from personal experience, I'd definitely say when I get a headache after a run, I do tend to use some kind of electrolytes, and it tends to help me. So it's
I would say based on anecdote alone, it's a common resolution, and it's a relatively easy and safe thing to try. If you're someone who suffers with headaches a little bit, trying to take an electrolyte drink before or during or after a run to see if it helps is pretty low risk and could be the answer to the problem.
So next we've got a broader question about both hydration and fueling, and we've got a couple of people here. It's Roger Highland and Manny T have both asked, do we need to change your strategy as you get older, basically?
Yeah, with hydration and fueling as you get older, I think if we start with a simpler one, I would say with fueling, there's less of an objective reason why you need to change that as you age. I think it's still related to the duration of exercise, the intensity that you're going at. You will find that your fueling guidelines will probably be similar to what they were for a younger person. With hydration, something that we see quite often is that actually older athletes need to be a bit more mindful about their hydration and be a bit more proactive for 2 main reasons. One is that as you get older, you lose muscle mass, and in your muscle tissues where quite a lot of your body water is stored. So sort of by default, when you start exercising, you've got less water on board. So you actually can benefit from taking a little bit more fluid on a little bit earlier. And then coupled to that, as you get older, your sense of thirst can diminish. So if your thirst is diminishing, you have to think more consciously about drinking and maybe being more proactive about it. So those 2 things combined perhaps mean that as an older runner, you want to take your hydration a little bit more seriously and proactively earlier in your long runs.
Brilliant. So we've got a few practical questions about using the electrolyte supplements. The first is from Jack R, who in training will use the tabs and the powders, but it's hard to do that in a race. I actually had this exact thing with my marathon yesterday, I switched to the salt capsules. Do they have the same effect, essentially?
Yeah, the bottom line is I think they do. We developed the sweat salt capsules, which are a little capsule that you swallow for exactly that reason, in that when you're running a marathon, the last thing you want to be doing is trying to stop and put a tab in a bottle. That might be something you can do on an ultra run or something where you're moving a lot more slowly, but when you're running fast in a marathon, you want to carry what you're going to take. And so the electrolyte capsules are small, they have 250 milligrams of sodium in them each. The idea is that you take as many of those as you need and you chase them down with water when you're on the move. So they come in a little blister pack that you can just tuck in your pocket in your shorts.
Brilliant. And then maybe if people, actually just clarify it for myself as well, so if you need to think about how many of those relative to the tabs you'd normally, so if you normally use like a 5,000 or 1,000 thing, you should just basically scale up with your tab. Pills.
So it would be roughly, if you use the example of like our middle strength thing, which is 1,000 milligrams of sodium per litre, that would be the equivalent of roughly 4 of these little capsules for every litre that you drink.
Okay.
And in reality, you're not going to be stopping and drinking a litre and taking 4 tablets in the middle of a run, but what you might do is you might think, well, I'm planning to drink about, say, half a litre an hour through the cups at aid stations or the bottles at aid stations, so I'll take 2 of those capsules and wash them down at 2 aid stations per hour.
Fantastic.
So I think you can people can get caught up with the minutiae of like exactly how many of these. It's sort of, it's about getting in the right ballpark and making sure that you're taking with enough fluid, but those capsules are definitely the best thing for when you're on the move.
Another practical question here is from TV Johnny, and it's how do you keep electrolyte tabs in your bottles without them fizzing all over the place?
Yeah, that is definitely a problem if you mix them up on the move, because obviously they effervesce, which produces CO2, and then that builds up. So I would say the simplest thing is if you're mixing up drinks to use in a scenario where you're going to have them in sealed bottles, is mix them up early ahead of time and leave them. Most of the fizzing happens in the first minute or 2, but then there still is a little bit that comes afterwards. So basically mix them up early and leave the lid off for as long as possible, a few hours if you can, and then they'll go flat and then you can put them back on. If you can't do that, you need to leave the lid cracked so that the gas can escape, because otherwise they pop.
Yeah, I will say, I someone who I used to put a half tab in, because usually the bottles are 250 ml. I would basically let it go bananas with a very sealed lid, then open it a tiny bit and carry it. But that, it's a bit of a hassle on the run. But and just hear it fizzing and just like looking at it.
The drinks keep for quite a long time. So if you mix it up a few hours before, even the day before, stick it in the fridge. As long as you leave the lid off, and then it'll be fine.
That's the way to do it. Okay, and then the last practical question is from Luke Simmons, and this is actually about fueling. And it's if you're someone who has difficulty opening gels, what's the best alternative if you don't want to carry a big electrolyte drinks mix?
Yeah, so if you don't want to carry like a fuel drink, but you don't like opening gels, it is a bit of a tricky one, because I think what I would say is, we've actually, as we've just redesigned our gel packets to make them easier to go on the move, because some of them are particularly tough. So what I would say is, just to begin with, gels are a very compact way of carrying the energy. So if you can, like, persevere and try different types to get them open, because the only options for you to pick up on the course are normally going to be energy gels. If this is a marathon we're talking about, it's only going to be energy gels, maybe an isotonic drink. If you can stomach the isotonic drink and use that is one option for getting some of your fueling in. But and some people go towards even more solid foods like chews and things like that, but you've still kind of got the same type of issues, and then you've got to chew them. So there's not an easy way to say, you can do something completely different, but I would say, persevere with different types of packaging until you find something that is workable. We've got a gel coming soon, which actually, rather than having a tear lid, is a bigger pouch with more gel in it with a screw lid. So the idea is that makes it a lot easier to use on the move, so you should look out for those as well.
Brilliant. That's it. Use your teeth is my tip. I don't think I've ever opened a gel in my hands for years now. It's always
just rip the top off.
Right, moving on to fueling proper now. We've got a lot of questions actually about when to start and how early to start in a run. So I can't say this first name, but we'll put it on screen. The next one is Not Chrome and Mike Fletcher. Basically, they're asking how early should I start taking drinking gels? Is it all in the first 60 minutes? That kind of thing.
Yeah. So for marathons, starting to fuel relatively early is pretty important, I think. And I know that you've done a lot of marathons yourself, and you'll probably know that feeling that 20, 30 minutes into the marathon you don't necessarily feel like you want or need to start fueling, but that fuel that you take on at that point is what's going to help you later on. So it's having a schedule, trying to stick to it as best you can. You've got to adapt that schedule on the day based on how things are going. But I would say if you're looking at, fueling a 3-hour marathon, for example, I certainly wouldn't be leaving it more than 40 minutes before start taking something in. And everyone is a little bit different, but the amount of athletes that we see who leave it to an hour or even an hour and a half before when they actually start to feel like, I could do with some sugar now, then you are getting to a little bit to the point when it's too late. Now, if you look at what a lot of the elite runners do, they'll often use 5K
Yeah.
markers. Now they might not fuel at the first 5K, which for them would be 14, 16 minutes, but certainly from 30 minutes on, they'll be fueling pretty rigorously throughout.
And is that the same with electrolytes? Would you start electrolytes so early, or would you?
That depends a lot on the weather conditions.
Yeah.
So I would say there would be marathons where you'd virtually neglect electrolytes. They're not going to be needed in the colder conditions, or if you're someone who just has a low sweat rate. When it's hot and humid though, you would probably start dripping them in relatively early, although not necessarily. I don't think you would need to start quite as early as you would with carbs. It's probably within the first hour.
We also had a really interesting question, I think, about fueling and hydrating for shorter distances.
Yeah.
This is from Toddy514, and he's basically are interested to know about fueling strategies for shorter distances, and really talking about fueling prior to like a 5K and 10K. Yeah,
because it's a good question, because obviously during a 5K or a 10K, people aren't going to eat or drink anything really. You know, there is maybe some exceptions if you're out there, if you're getting into running in your first 10K, you might be taking an hour or longer. Yeah. It's a hot day, you might have a drink on the way around, but basically for most serious runners, 5 and 10K is definitely a nil by mouth sort of race. You want to be on the start line, therefore, fully hydrated, fully fueled. And fueling starts 48 hours or so out, because what you're trying to, in the body, your main energy stores for glycogen, which is the storage form of carbohydrate in the body, which you're going to burn doing a 5 and 10K, is in your muscles and in your liver. And in order to stock those up, you have to start early, because it can take several hours or even a day or so to fill them up. So extra carbohydrates in your diet in the last 48 hours is a good plan. And then on the morning of the race, a little carbohydrate breakfast, because overnight you won't have burned any muscle glycogen, but you will have burnt some liver glycogen, because that's what fuels your brain. And you just want to get that topped up, because that's going to keep your blood sugar up. If some athletes also like to have a gel, especially if they've not had a lot of breakfast, have a gel in the last 15 minutes before the start. That splits opinion. I'm quite in favour of it. I tend to do that if I've not had a lot to eat. Other people don't like it so much, but that can be a good idea to top off your fuel stores. Your hydration though is a bit different, because you can't start hydrating 2 days out. You've got to start that, that you don't want to get dehydrated, but at the same time you can't load up like you can with carbs. So a strong electrolyte drink on the morning of the race, on top of just a normal day-to-day regime of your normal drinking, should see you right for hydration.
Okay, and then we've got a couple of questions related to fasted training, basically training on an empty stomach essentially. The first one's from Tom Klaus. It's basically about fasted training and doing a series of workouts on that. Is that going to make you more efficient generally, or just lead to a series of bad workouts? And can you do a kind of fasted version of not hydrating?
So fasted training, a lot of people do it either deliberately or not so, especially because those of us that train first thing in the morning, if I go out, quite often I'll run at 6:30 in the morning, having got up at 6 and maybe just had a black coffee or something before I go. And that means that you're essentially not taking on any external fuel other than what you've had the night before. And fasted training has a place in people's training, but I think it can be a little bit misunderstood. So people perceive that if you train fasted, it's about burning more fat, which it can be, but not necessarily always. What a lot of athletes who use fasted training properly are doing it for is to increase the adaptation that they get from the run. So, for instance, training with deliberately lower glycogen, having not refueled adequately, is a stronger stressor for the body, sending stronger signals to drive adaptation. The problem is it can also compromise the quality of the training that you can do, because obviously if you're trying to run as fast as you can or do a hard interval workout or something, you aren't going to run your fastest times and stimulate the best benefit by training fasted. Same with your hard long run. If you're doing marathon training on a weekend, you would probably in most circumstances want to do that adequately fueled. It's actually some of your steadier, easier runs on easier days that you might choose to do fasted to increase to augment the response of those. So it's a fine line with fasted training as to what you have to think about what you're trying to achieve.
Okay.
I would say most of the time for most athletes you're better off going into the majority of your training sessions as well fueled as you can without being silly about it. It doesn't mean you have to carb load before everything, but just making sure you're fueled, because it's the quality of training that's going to drive the biggest adaptation, not whether you did it fasted or not.
Okay.
So yeah, worth playing around with, and you know, like I say, for a lot of people, your routine, when you look at your routine, it might actually lead to some inadvertent fasted training anyway, if you're running first thing on the morning, and for me that's usually enough. I'll then make sure if I'm running on an evening, I'm doing I'm fueling up before it, because otherwise I'll just see my performance drop off, and that's not what you want.
No, definitely not. And then on that second point, there's no real fasted version of hydration, is there? Or
no, running dehydrated effectively is just a bad idea generally. So it will just lead to a miserable run and slower recovery. So I would say you don't want to go down that route. Yeah.
Perfect. The second question we have on fasted training is from Mark G, and it talks about going from fasted to, so starting a long run fasted, but then he has a Kendall mint cake about 8k in, so it's going from fasted to fueled like that. Is that going to cause any potential issues?
Yeah. I don't think that, I mean, that then effectively isn't, if you like, a fasted run, because you are fueling during, and you might have started without any breakfast or whatever. That's just going to change the nature. Your body will just kick into burning the most preferential fuel source it can, which in that case, if you're putting sugars directly into the system, your body's going to start burning them. So it stops it from being a fasted run. But if that's not what you're aiming for, if what you're aiming to run is the best sort of quality training session you can, then fueling mid-run is a really good idea.
Brilliant.
I would say actually, Nick, if you or if people are interested on the idea of how to use fasted training, there's quite an in-depth article which is called Fueling for the Work Required, which is quite famous in sports science circles. It was written by some researchers from, I think, Liverpool John Moores, and if you Google that, there are summaries of that online which are really good. And fueling for the work required is this concept that on harder days when you're doing faster intervals or doing long, hard aerobic efforts, you do fuel quite a lot, but then maybe you fuel less aggressively on your easier days, giving the body a chance to adapt a little bit more.
Brilliant. So, I'll find a link and pop that in the comment. Right, next up, we've got a couple of questions about caffeine and caffeine in gel. So this is from Lucas S and Mohammed Magaweed. The first question is, what kind of stage of a marathon would you be taking caffeine? Is there any recommended amount or healthy amount? And the other question is, should you taper the caffeine you have in the build up to a race to get more of an effect on the day?
That's a really good question, because so if I go back to what I used to do as an uneducated athlete, it was take caffeine late in a race, because I would think I'd want the kick. I'm getting tired, I want to take the caffeine on and get a kick, and I would come off caffeine and coffee and things about a week before, so that I'd feel more of an effect on it. That was what I used to do. Both of those things I would wholeheartedly not recommend people to do now. The science and experience sort of tells us that for a start, caffeine can take 20, 30, even 40 minutes to kind of get into and peak in your bloodstream. So if you were, for instance, wanting to use caffeine in a marathon, there's no point in taking it in the last 5k, because it will hit you when you've crossed the finish line. So what you actually want to be doing is using caffeine pre-race, if you use it habitually anyway, using it pre-race as you normally would in your morning routine, and then potentially dripping a little bit more in the earlier stages of the race, so that it keeps the caffeine levels up in your bloodstream. To give you an idea of sort of effective dosage, it's usually quoted to be between sort of 3 and 6 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. So that can be sort of, if you're 70 kilos, what's that, like 200, 400 milligrams of caffeine. But for most running events, even for marathon actually, but certainly for anything under marathon, it's mostly about caffeine that you've taken beforehand rather than in the race, because it'll stay in your system. Caffeine has quite a long half-life, so it stays in your system for hours and hours. And so having it before or having it early in the race is probably better than having it later on. With regards to that abstinence of caffeine the week before, I just think that if you regularly drink coffee or tea and have caffeine on a daily basis, and then in that crucial phase of build up into the race you sort of go cold turkey on that, that can make you feel quite lousy and quite lethargic and headaches and all of that, and there's no proven performance benefit for that. You're just kind of putting yourself through the mix. So I would say keep your caffeine habits, standard, really. The other thing to add about caffeine in general is that everyone responds a little bit differently. Okay. So when you read about the average dosages, the responses people have had in studies using caffeine, you see those average numbers, there's quite a lot of variance.
Right.
So in our house we have to have a coffee machine which does both caffeinated beans and decaf beans because my wife just can't have, she really can't have much caffeine at all. It gives her the jitters and she gets all of the bad effects of caffeine without any of the good. I, on the other hand, seem to have a pretty reasonable tolerance of it, and so I can drink it and actually don't feel great in the morning if I haven't had a cup of coffee, like a lot of people. So I think it's learning your individual responses and that. But the number one thing, just to reiterate with caffeine, is don't expect the kick to be like immediate or trying to use it late in a race, because that's the number one mistake.
Yeah, I used to do that as well. 22 miles, here we go, big caffeine hit.
Yeah, and it gets you across the finish line, or gets you when you've crossed the finish line. Yeah.
A number of people actually asked about the precision hydration and the fueling range and basically how they're different to other products. So we've got questions from Kevin, Boyd, Dave, Travis, and basically really the question is, how much difference do these gels to the stuff that's out there would be the kind of summary of these questions, and and how do they fit in compared to products from other brands? Yeah,
I would say the biggest single difference with our energy gels, for example, than the other products out there is that they have 30 grams of carbohydrate in per unit. So each gel is 51 grams of gel, of which 30 grams is carbohydrate. So because there's obviously a little bit of water and things in there. Now, 30 grams is a useful number because most carbohydrate recommendations are given in sort of units of 30 grams an hour, 60 grams an hour, 90 grams an hour. Yet most energy gels seem to give out random amounts. So it'll be 22 grams of carbohydrate or 27, and that just makes it difficult to work out your numbers. Alongside them, what we've done is we've built a quick carb calculator on the website. So when you go to the gels page, it's a really useful little tool that's totally free. You can just click how much fuel do I need, put in what sport you're doing, how long you're going for, and at what intensity, and it will give you an idea of whether you need 30, 60, 90 or whatever grams of carb per hour. So the whole premise of what we've done with that fueling range is to try to make that equation simple and then give you the tools to do it. I would say the other thing that makes the precision fuel gels and drink a little bit different to most of the others out there is a very neutral flavour. They're very, very mild. So the idea is that you should almost, I don't want to use the word bland because that always has bad connotations, but you want sports nutrition that isn't going to make you gag or,
exactly.
And I think the precision fuel products taste great, but they're very mild. So even when it's hot, even when you're working really, really hard, you can take them in and just keep going and crack on.
With the gels, they're ones that you recommend like washing down a little bit, or is that something people should try to do, or is it not essential? Or
it depends on the weather, I find, a little bit. Like if it's cold, I'll go out and I can run and take 2 or 3 gels in a run with either zero or very close to zero liquid, because they're not too sticky and syrupy. In the heat, you're definitely going to want to wash them down, but that's the same with any. So it's a little bit to the weather conditions. Generally, you might find that the gels are easier to swallow and kind of digested a bit quicker if you take them with a little bit of water, but I don't think it's essential if you're not doing loads of sweating at the same time.
Right, and then one last question, which I think is really good because it's something I really think about a lot because during busy training regimes. This is from Jose Alfredo Leal Naranjo, who asks, is there any relation between the carb intake during training and the speed of recovery? So basically, if you keep fueling correctly, you're going to recover better generally. Yeah,
that is a really great question, especially for those of us that are not training full time, which is probably most of us. And you do your training session in the morning and then you've got to go to work, or if it's the weekend, you've got to be keeping up with your kids. And I definitely know that if you don't fuel during a long, hard training run in the morning, then you are going to feel like your recovery is compromised. And that's because it actually will be, because you're going to have ripped through so much more muscle glycogen, you're going to have put more stress on the body. You're just going to, even if you can get through the run without eating, a longish run for me these days tends to be maybe 90 minutes at max, and I can get through that without eating. But if I have a gel or two or some some drinks with some energy in them as well, I find that my speed of recovery is dramatically better. And I think that that's a really important point. And if you're trying to then, not only for that performance in the rest of the day, but if you're trying to back that up with another long run the next day, or you're trying to build consistency in your training over a period of time, then fueling during runs longer than 60 minutes is a really good habit to get into. One that probably a lot of runners don't, because they kind of feel like, oh yeah, I can get through that without anything.
Yeah, definitely. I have a big thing about that with my mate, who's more of a short distance runner, and I'm saying I'm not just fueling for this run. And actually, since I had my kid's 2 years old now, my fueling got a lot better day to day because I needed more energy after the run that I did during it.
You've got to be on your A game afterwards. Yeah, for sure.
Well, thanks very much, Andy, again, for answering all those questions. Guys, please do keep commenting and liking. We'll try and help out with some questions in the comments below again. This is the end of this little mini-series. We've got a code, though, for some precision products you can use on the website, right?
Yeah, people can use Run Testers as a code to get a little discount on the products. I would also say as well, you can email us on hello@precisionhydration.com if you've got any questions. We'd love to follow up with you on those. You can book free one-to-one video calls with the team as well.
Thank you very much again. It's been fantastic to have you on, and please like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time.